Sarah lived in the heavy, velvet silence that only exists for mothers of 6-month-old infants at the edge of total burnout. Every shadow in the nursery felt like a physical weight, and the low blue glow of the digital baby monitor was the only lighthouse in her ocean of exhaustion. Her son, Leo, had been a miracle from the start. He was what books called a perfect baby, the kind that slept through the night and smiled at every passerby. A quiet soul who seemed to understand the world far better than his age should have allowed. But that perfection began to fray at the edges precisely 3 weeks ago, replaced by a precision that was far more terrifying than any colic or teething fit could ever be. It happened first on a rainy Tuesday at exactly 3:00 a.m. Sarah had been jolted awake, not by the piercing, jagged cry she expected, but by something far more unsettling. From the small speaker on her nightstand came the sound of a rhythmic, deep-bellied laugh. It wasn't the spontaneous, bubbling giggle of a child discovering a new toy. It was structured, timed, and chillingly consistent. When Sarah rushed into the nursery, her heart hammering against her ribs, she found Leo sitting upright in his crib. His eyes were fixed with predatory focus on the darkest corner of the room. He wasn't looking at her. He was laughing at the shadows, his tiny chest heaving in a cadence that felt like a rehearsed performance. Night after night, the phenomenon repeated with mathematical accuracy. At the stroke of 3, the laughter would begin. Sarah watched through the infrared lens of the monitor as Leo's eyes tracked something invisible moving slowly across the ceiling. He would tilt his head, his gaze sweeping from the wardrobe to the window, always following a path she couldn't see. The laughter became more intense and performed, as if he were an audience member, responding to a master comedian. During the day, the toll was visible. Leo was no longer the vibrant child he once was. He was perpetually exhausted, his eyes underlined by dark circles, his tiny limbs heavy with fatigue. Yet, as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, his energy seemed to coil up, waiting for the appointment he had with the dark. Desperation led Sarah to the deep corners of the internet, past the generic parenting blogs and medical advice sites. She found herself in an elite, private forum where her blood ran cold. Hundreds of parents from around the globe were reporting the exact same thing. A mother in London, a father in Tokyo, a family in Rio. All of them described babies who woke at exactly 3:00 a.m., local time to laugh at the empty air. It wasn't a cultural quirk or a medical anomaly. It was a global synchronization. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. It was through this forum that she was contacted by Dr. Aris Thorne. He was a disgraced neuroscientist whose name had been scrubbed from academic journals. A man once heralded as a brilliant genius before being branded a dangerous fringe theorist. Thorne didn't offer comfort. He offered a terrifying cold diagnosis. He told Sarah that what she was witnessing was a synaptic hijack. He claimed that top scientists were secretly terrified because this phenomenon was spreading like a digital virus, jumping silently from nursery to nursery across the web. Thorne sent Sarah an encrypted file containing high-resolution EEG readings from dozens of infants during these 3:00 a.m. episodes. Sarah stared at the jagged green lines on her dark screen, her breath catching in her throat. Thorne explained that the brainwaves didn't follow organic pulses. They were rigid, repetitive, and unnaturally structured. Leo's brain wasn't dreaming or playing. It was processing a complex, artificial binary code. His nervous system transformed into a biological receiver for a signal that shouldn't exist in the natural world. Thorne's voice over the line was a dry rasp that chilled Sarah to the bone. He spoke of Project Nocturnal Neural Responses, a government initiative buried when they realized infants were tapping into a layer of reality adults had long ago evolved to ignore for the sake of survival. The very foundations of her home felt fragile under the weight of this revelation. Thorne explained the 3:00 a.m. laughter was a synaptic hijack, a desperate defensive mechanism. The baby's brains were being bombarded by a frequency intrusion, a signal at a pitch the adult mind cannot perceive. To process this massive influx, the infant's brains discharged energy through the motor cortex, manifesting as forced, repetitive laughter. During the day, the consequences became agonizingly clear. Sarah watched Leo's personality evaporate, leaving a hollow version of her son. His real smiles were replaced by a vacant, thousand-yard stare. He was no longer interested in toys or the sound of Sarah's voice. Every day was a countdown to the moment her child would be stolen again. He was a battery being drained by a parasitic force, saving every spark of biological energy for the nightly performance. Leo had become a ghost in a cradle, a vessel for something ancient and digital. He was becoming a stranger in his own skin, a biological shell waiting for the sun to go down. The connection was insidious. Thorne's data revealed a link between the laughter and the smart sleep technology Sarah relied on. The white noise machines and high-definition monitors, designed for safety, were actually delivery systems. They operated on a frequency that acted as a carrier wave for the intrusion. These devices, connected to the global grid, served as conduits bridging the gap between an artificial binary signal and the raw synapses of an infant's mind. Every blue light and digital hum in the house was a potential doorway. The nursery had been transformed into a digital laboratory without Sarah's consent. Desperate, Sarah allowed Thorne to bring monitoring equipment into her home. He set up thermal cameras and sensory probes around Leo's crib, his movements precise and cold. When the clock struck 3, the equipment hummed with intensity. On the thermal display, Sarah saw something that defied physics. In the corner where Leo stared, a distinct heat signature appeared. It wasn't a person, but a swirling distortion of infrared energy, hovering like a predatory cloud inches from the baby's face. The camera lens shivered as it struggled to focus on the impossible mass of heat. The nothingness Leo laughed at was a physical presence, pulsing in rhythm with his chest. The true horror surfaced when Sarah discovered a hidden file in Thorne's bag. She found images of a girl named Clara, Thorne's daughter. Clara had been patient zero during his original study. The realization hit Sarah hard. Thorne wasn't here to help. He was a broken man who had lost his own child to this signal, and he was now using Leo as biological bait. He was intentionally keeping the signal open, hoping to lure the source back into the light to reclaim the data he lost years ago. Regardless of the cost to Leo's sanity, he had turned her nursery into a trap, and her son into the piece of meat. This betrayal was interrupted by a shift in the nursery's atmosphere. At exactly 2:59 a.m., the equipment vibrated with a violent hum. Beneath the sound of Leo's rising laughter, the audio processors isolated a voice-like resonance buried within the signal. It wasn't a child's sound. It was a distorted, mechanical imitation of Sarah's own voice, whispering back to Leo in a language of clicking consonants and binary pulses. Sarah felt a scream building in her throat. As the digital mimicry grew louder, the signal wasn't just watching him. It was talking to him, claiming him entirely before the 3:00 a.m. hour had even truly begun. The second the clock struck 3:00 a.m., the rhythmic laughter shattered into something jagged and suffocating. Leo wasn't just laughing anymore. His tiny chest heaved with a violent spastic force that caused him to gag and struggle for air. His face turned a bruised shade of purple, his eyes bulging as if his lungs were being operated by an invisible, cruel bellows. Sarah's maternal instinct overrode every warning Thorne had given her. She dove toward the crib. The air in the nursery didn't just feel cold, it felt like liquid nitrogen, a biting frost that crystallized her breath instantly. As her fingers brushed the wooden rails, the temperature plummeted further, creating a localized winter that radiated from Leo's skin, a frozen barrier between the mother and her child. Suddenly, the room erupted in a digital nightmare. Every smart device in the house, from the monitor to the speakers in the kitchen, began to vomit out a distorted, layered cacophony of Leo's recorded laughter. It wasn't a playback. It was a deafening feedback loop, a wall of sound that vibrated the floorboards and rattled the windows until they threatened to shatter. The house was screaming. Thorne stood in the center of the chaos, his eyes wide and manic, adjusting dials on his equipment. He wasn't trying to help the boy. He was leaning into the noise, desperate to capture the peak of the signal. He looked like a man watching a star go supernova. Indifferent to the planet it was incinerating as long as he could document the light. In that moment of blinding sensory overload, Sarah saw the truth. The signal wasn't just coming from the air. It was being fed and amplified by the very technology she had bought for safety. The cameras were the eyes of the intruder. The speakers were its mouth, and the global Wi-Fi network was its sprawling nervous system. She didn't think. She acted. She grabbed the base of the baby monitor and slammed it against the floor. Then, she moved to the smart speaker, ripping the wires from the wall with a frantic strength. She moved through the house like a whirlwind, smashing every screen and crushing every plastic shell she could find. She was dismantling the bridge. As the last screen flickered and died, the silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The temperature in the nursery surged back to normal in a sickening wave of heat. Leo's body went limp, his violent gasping stopping instantly as he fell into a deep, natural sleep. But Thorne, staring at his darkened monitors, didn't look relieved. He looked defeated. He whispered a warning that chilled Sarah to her core. The connection had already been mapped. The frequency had reached its destination. Thorne explained that the laughter virus had evolved beyond the need for hardware. It had adapted to the infant's neural pathways, embedding itself into the wetware of the human brain. It no longer needed a monitor to travel. It was already inside. Sarah didn't wait for the authorities or for Thorne's next experiment. She took Leo and fled into the mountains. She moved to a cabin in a remote area, where the nearest cell tower was a day's drive away. She lived in a world of candles, wood-fired stoves, and heavy silence. But the peace was a hollow lie. She lived in a state of permanent vigilance, watching the clock every night as the hour of 3 approached. One night, as the mechanical, wind-up clock on the mantel chimed 3 times, Sarah held her breath. Leo remained perfectly still. No laughter came. Sarah leaned in, a flicker of hope warming her chest. But as she watched her son in the moonlight, she saw his eyes open. He didn't laugh. He didn't cry. He simply turned his head with a slow, adult precision and looked directly at the camera Sarah had secretly kept running. His lips curled into a wide, predatory, and horribly knowing adult smile, signaling that the silence was only the beginning.